Now, if you don't think they were targeting the illegal population with that new law, you are seriously not reading the tea leaves here. The problem, of course, is it applies to everybody, not just the undocumented. So your 15-year-old son who would like to go to work and pretend that he's at least 16 may be getting a hold of an ID document that is not valid. He is subject to that law just as much as someone who's undocumented. That is a very scary law. It is not, by the way, has not been contested under the current federal court litigation. Speaking of that, Chuck, why don't you tell the audience what the status is in that federal court litigation?
There's a lot of misinformation about the litigation. We only challenged basically 4 provisions of the statute under HB 87. We did not challenge the criminal law provision for using fake documents to get a job, for example, because we couldn't prove any actual harm yet. But we went after the 2 key parts of it were, for us, were the provisions that made criminal penalties for transporting and harboring an undocumented immigrant, which went after specifically schools and social service organizations. We were able to stop that along with other provision in the law that created a lot of potential damage in the community. District Court Judge Thrash upheld our challenge, and we are currently at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The state of Georgia has filed their brief in support of their preliminary appeal of the preliminary injunction issued by the judge. Our brief from our side is due October 4th. Short after that, probably sometime in November is my guess, we'll have oral argument on that. And we're thinking by the end of the year, the 11th Circuit will rule on whether Judge Thrash's preliminary injunction was appropriate. The case is not over, however. We don't have a final order from Judge Thrash. We've actually had no hearings other than an oral argument on our injunction at this point. And if the 11th Circuit does not uphold the preliminary injunction, we will simply go back to Judge Thrash and finish the case. And he may very well uphold his position again. Right now, we feel very strongly that we will win at the 11th Circuit and that these 2 key provisions will be struck down. There are other challenges to be had on HB 87 as people begin to suffer under the provisions of them. But until that happens, we really can't challenge them. For example, the governor just appointed, as did the speaker and the majority leader, the members of the Immigration Enforcement Review Board, which you may have heard of. And there's a lot of misinformation about that as well, Mark, where people think that this board is going to go out and witch hunt businesses who will hire undocumented. And that's unfortunate. That fortunately is not not within the parameters of this board. All they can do is go after state employees or state agency heads who don't do one of 3 things. 1, they don't properly use E-Verify to E-Verify their own newest state employees, which is required. 2, they somehow permit a sanctuary policy. Of course, there's no sanctuary policies in Georgia. Or 3, they don't use a system called SAVE to check people's immigration status who are applying for immigration benefits. Those are the only 3 things this board can investigate, and it can only go after state employees. So the reality is there isn't a witch hunt board out there, but it is somewhat complicated, and we're going to see probably more develop as complaints get filed.
Anybody in the audience do any contracting with a state or any type of government agency within the state of Georgia? And we won't go to all those provisions, but there's a whole set of provisions that have been in existence and have been updated. If you ever do business with even a tiny municipality, you're going to come under the old Georgia Immigration Act as it's been updated. I think at this point, if you don't mind, I think we ought to open up for questions.
Sounds good. The only issue I guess we have would be hearing the question by everyone.
We can hear it. We can speak loudly.
Okay, are there any questions that you'd like to ask of these very renowned experts? Okay.
For the immigration guys, if I have several hundred, if a company has several hundred employees, and let's say historically, intentionally or unintentionally, we did not do a very good job of seeing that our employees were legal, so am I in a squeeze? Can I get in trouble for that, but I cannot now go back and check? Or if I've got a potential problem, can I clean it up?
Yes. Yes, but let's understand the question. What if you have not done a good job with your I-9 completions, your I-9 maintenance of those forms, you haven't done any audits, but you just know they're a mess. A little bit like the tax
With respect
situation.
to document, that everyone is in the country fully documented.
Well, I think maybe one thing we want to talk about with I-9ing is you still have the choice as a company whether to copy the documents you're provided with the I-9 or not to.
Until you're an E-Verify.
Right, if you're an E-Verify, you have to copy certain of those documents, not all the documents. But the E-Verify documents that you have to use, those have to be copied. But those documents aren't necessarily in parallel with what you've received from your employees for their I-9s.
Right. What you would do in your situation, and any employer who wants to make sure they're in compliance, and frankly, before enrolling in E-Verify, every employer at that point, before the enrollment, should be conducting an audit of their I-9s. And frankly, I think it should be an outside audit. You don't want the same people who screwed up your I-9s in the first place to be auditing your I-9s now. But what you can do is literally go back and correct I-9s as long as you timely date them and fix them. There's a whole process to go through. You can, let's say you look at an I-9 and there's no documents presented. Section 2 is just not filled out. You can call the employee in and say, I'm really sorry, we show it to you, we didn't fill it out, we need you to bring us one of these or one of each of these documents. And you can at that time late complete it. That doesn't excuse you if you're audited by ICE later on from fines and penalties, although it may, but it does make sure that you have systems in place before you're on board with the new federal system to make sure you're at least as fully compliant as you can get with the process.
Because remember, the I-9s are for your current workforce. E-Verify will be for your new hires.